It's been said that everybody's got a story to tell. Well, the person we're about to meet tonight, there's no group of people in America more prepared to argue their constitutional rights.
That's how we connect to each other. That's how we connect to our communities. And that's what we tried to do here at the Café.
Born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the home of Black Wall Street, Dean Julia Wilson credits her hometown for where her passion for journalism and entrepreneurship first sprouted. Throughout her career, Dean Wilson has chronicled some of the world's most important and memorable events. These include the 1994 election of Nelson Mandela as South Africa's president and the 2006 election of the first woman elected to the position of president in the continent of Africa, Liberia's former president Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. In 2015, Wilson received the Pat Tobin Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Black Public Relations Society, and in 2016 she received the Outstanding Alumna Award from the USC Black Alumni Association. Since 2017, Wilson has served as a member of the advisory board for the Center for Public Relations in the USC Annenberg School of Communications and Journalism. In that same year, she coordinated the English to Mandarin translation of Principles of Leadership, authored by Dr. William R. Harvey himself, the 12th president of Hampton University. Regarding her entrepreneurial mindset, she is the CEO and founder of her worldwide communications consulting company and has amassed a network of clients that spans the globe. Now touting over 2 decades of relevant journalism and strategic communications experience, she is a valuable treasure to the Hampton University community, here at our home by the sea.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome to another broadcast here at Scripps Howard School of Journalism on the campus of Hampton University. I'm Earl Caldwell, and this is the Caldwell Café. We have no guests today. We have an introduction. It is our great pleasure to introduce our new leader, the new dean of the Scripps Howard School of Journalism and Communication, Julia Wilson. Welcome.
Thank you.
I feel that I don't know where to go because you have had so many fantastic experiences that I don't know where to start. But let me start with this. I'm always taken by everything with Nelson Mandela. And you, as a reporter, had an opportunity to be there in South Africa and see his start outside the prison walls. Let us start there. And we'll go back.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Caldwell, for having me on the Caldwell Café. I'm very excited to be here as well.
And we're excited to have you.
Thank you. And I do want to thank President Harvey for the opportunity to be here at Hampton as the new dean of the Scripps Howard School of Journalism and Communications. I am very, very grateful for that opportunity. Yes, I did cover the election in South Africa, and I'll tell you how I got there. You know, I was a TV news reporter in Los Angeles. I actually had a TV segment on the news on KCOP TV, and I went over to cover the elections, but you know, I'd never heard anything positive about Africa or people of African descent. All the negative images and things you read about in school just were negative. And so when I landed in South Africa and I saw what I saw freeways and palm trees like California. I saw Africans carrying briefcases, businessmen, ATMs in the airport, and I said, you know, I felt like I'd been lied to all my life. And I picked up the phone, I called the TV station, I said, I'm not coming back. I called my mom and I said, Mom, I'm not coming home. And she said, have you lost your mind?
Oh, wow.
And when I hung up the phone, I thought I had lost my mind because I just quit my job, and here I am in Africa, I don't know anybody. And I'm like, okay, what am I going to do here? First, I got to cover the elections, and which I did. It was a 3-day election, and I was connected with CNN over there to satellite my stories back to California to KCOP, and they aired them each day of the elections. But I just made a list of my skills and said, what does that equal? And to me, it equaled a public relations company. And so I partnered with 3 Black South Africans, and we founded the first Black-owned full-service public relations agency in the newly democratic South Africa.
Incredible.
And I stayed there for 4 years and operated my business, and thank God Coca-Cola became our first client.
Wow.
So we were able to position the Coke brand with Secretary of Commerce Ron Brown's visit there, Hillary Clinton's visit, and most of the dignitaries coming in from the U.S., but also the Prince of Wales Trust hired us to do some work, and other governments like the government of Ghana hired us to promote the top businesses in the country and publish a magazine that would promote them during the visit of President Bill Clinton. And so we grew the business between South Africa and Ghana while I lived in Johannesburg.
Where did you get that kind of confidence? I mean, I think a lot of people say, well, but I'm not going to stay, you know.
Right.
But that was a humongous decision, wasn't it?
Well, I didn't have intentions to stay. It's just I was so impacted by what I saw and what I had heard before that it just touched my soul to the core. And I said, if I'm seeing positive things in Africa just upon landing, what else is there that I need to know?
Right.
And that curiosity, I think, is what drove me.
Fantastic. Interesting thing you say, that the slant on so much was negative. And you know, isn't it true in America too now that if it's not really bad, it's not the news?
Well, you see, I believe in more balanced news. I grew up learning how to, in the journalism school in USC, they taught us to get different perspectives and find balance and fact check and use sources, credible sources, and check that out. And that's the way I grew up thinking of journalism. And so when you read about stories that have a negative image of starving people and violence and images of tribes and Tarzan and Jane, what are you going to think of that not only country but continent? And if your background descends from that kind of an image, what do you think of yourself? And so I think it affects your self-image when you're seeing negative things about where you come from and your background. So going over thinking, okay, I'm not staying, I'm just going to go and do this story and come back and get an anchor job at CNN. I mean, that was the plan, to get international experience. But when I got there and I saw positive things that hadn't balanced out those news stories that I read about in the US or saw in the US, and I just was struck by that and to the core. And it changed my whole life and just the way I think about the world in general, which is what prompted me to continue going throughout the world to other countries.
And I see you've been to, what, like 13, I think you said more than 13 countries you had experiences.
I've either lived in or worked on projects in about 13 countries, from, of course, South Africa and Ghana, but we've done work in Nigeria and Kenya, Malawi, Senegal, Brazil. I got a Fulbright grant to lecture in France, in Paris and Lyon, and then I went to study over there for a while in Villefranche so I could learn a little French. And then we've also worked in China for the last 11 years.
Wow, what an amazing background.
It's been interesting.
When you went to South Africa, you started a business. Did you have any background in business?
Well, I've always been an entrepreneur at heart.
Okay, all right.
And I think when I started the fashion company, that was my first little, shot at being an entrepreneur. But before that, I mean, even the way I got onto KCOP is interesting because when I graduated from USC, nobody would hire me, and I couldn't get a job. So I'd send out all these resumes, about 200 of them. I was counting. And I just got rejection letter after rejection letter, and I said, okay, what I'm going to do is hire myself. And so what I did, it was right after Rodney King was beaten.
Yes.
And I created a magazine called Good News, and it was designed to bridge racial and ethnic gaps in Los Angeles. I published in 2 languages. But people were laughing at me and said, nobody wants to hear good news. That's not news, right?
Yeah.
But what I did, I started knocking on corporate doors to get advertising support to publish. I had so many no's, probably 100 no's there too. And then finally Toyota gave me the first seed money to publish. So we published 15,000 copies the first month. Within 3 months, we were up to 45,000 copies. I got distribution at the 7-Eleven stores, distribution at the LAX airport, and we were rolling.
Wow.
So after the magazine became a success, I decided we need to bring these stories alive on TV. So I started calling up the TV stations, right? And people were like, nobody wants to hear good news. I said, but I got to bring these stories alive.
Yeah.
And I called KCOP so many times that they said, look, if we put you on and anybody watches, you can stay. But if nobody watches, would you promise not to call us anymore? And I agreed, and that's how I got on with my news segment.
Incredible. Fantastic.
So that's my entrepreneurship.
Yes. Well, also, it's you have that daring. Most people are, they say, well, I don't have the experience, or I don't know, but go out. But where did you get that from?
Maybe it came from Tulsa.
Okay.
I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we had the richest entrepreneurs in the country, right? Until 1921, and they had the 1921 massacre in Tulsa. Well, my mom was an entrepreneur. She had a beauty salon on our back porch. Wow. And so I grew up with maybe that mindset.
Yes.
Because I've always wanted to, I've always been curious about the world, about other people, what makes us similar and what makes us different throughout the world. And so that's always been fascinating to me.
And growing up in Tulsa, how did you get these stories? How did that story of what happened, how did that come to you?
They didn't teach us that in school.
Not at all?
No, I never even knew that there was a 1921 massacre. I never heard anything about it. I did wonder why a lot of the black people were so shy about talking to white people. They would kind of look down, or there was some kind of nervousness about it.
Right.
But I didn't know the background, and I was one of those students, few students, who were bused to the white high school downtown. So my brothers and sisters, all of them went to Booker T. Washington High School, which was the black school, and I went to Central High School, and we had different educations because we had good books in my school. We had the best, good teachers at Booker T, but it was different. And so I grew up in that atmosphere, in that environment, but we lived on the north side of the railroad tracks, and that's a different kind of environment. Most of the white people lived on the south side of the railroad tracks. So when it was time to go to the prom, I was going to the prom with a white student.
Oh?
And my mother said, he can't come over here to pick you up. And I said, well, he has to. I mean, how am I going to get to the prom, right? Yeah. And she said, well, I can't guarantee his safety. And so he drove over, picked me up. We went to the prom. No incidences. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So in an early age, then, you were interacting with white people and comfortable.
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of black journalists in my generation, good journalists, but they never could get comfortable with the white environment. overwhelmingly white environment. Did you, well, you were never intimidated in media things, evidently. That didn't bother you either, that
No.
it was predominantly white.
I'm not easily intimidated. And I've always thought I was as good as them or anybody in the world. So whether I knew something or not, if they learned it, I can learn it. And so it didn't bother me if I didn't have the background to go into, say for example, China. I didn't speak Mandarin or anything, but I ended up lecturing at a university. Hebei, it was Hebei Science and Technology University. I ended up lecturing there in English, and they would translate, and then eventually I would pick up some Mandarin, and then I took a course, and you know, you learn it as you go, right?
I can't say anything. I'm stunned. Who were your role models at that age where you got this special thing?
No, it's a God
Special
thing.
confidence. You say it's a
God. I think it's a God thing because I really didn't have a lot of role models in my neighborhood. We went to church. My mother was the church clerk, and so you know, that was about it. But as I said, as a teenager, I left home. So because I just knew, I felt like I belonged somewhere else. I always felt like I didn't belong there, that I belonged somewhere else, and I didn't know where that somewhere else was.
Right.
But I was going to just go in and experiment and see where I fit,
Right.
where I belong.
right. Wow, wow, fantastic. So you went out to your first trip away from Oklahoma was to
Portland.
Portland.
Portland, Oregon. My brother was in the Air Force up in Blaine, Washington, and then he moved to Portland. So when I left home, about a one-way ticket. I could type. I was working for Shell Oil Company, had a little job, and I used that money to get to Portland. And then when I got to Portland, I worked 3 jobs. Worked for a bank, and then at night I had a computer job, and then I worked on the weekends at Nordstrom's, and got my own apartment, and sent myself to finishing school because I had a Southern drawl. And I
Is that from Oklahoma?
from Oklahoma. Oklahoma's like Mississippi in a lot of ways.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like the South. It's
Okay.
and the accent does come back if I talk to my
Right.
my family or go back
right.
and visit.
Right.
But I had a Southern drawl, and I said I've got to get rid of this Southern drawl because I'm going to be running in some high class places, right? I just knew it
Yes,
intuitively.
yes.
And I went to John Robert Powers Modeling School, recorded my voice every day for 2 years, and worked on each syllable until I got rid of that thing.
Fantastic. Oh, ooh.
Crazy.
That is amazing. That is amazing. So, how did you move then from Portland to this wider experience?
Well, I became a flight attendant, actually, for United Airlines.
Okay.
And they sent me to Chicago for training. And then I got stationed in Elizabeth, New Jersey as my first base. And then I got sent to Seattle, Washington. Well, on
Roughly what year are we talking about now in Seattle?
What year? If I tell you the year, you'll be you'll be able to calculate how. But it was a long time ago. Let's go there.
Fair enough.
It was
fair
a long
enough.
time ago.
What I was wondering, the reason I asked that is the jet planes came along in in the 60s or 50s? No, it was the 60s.
Later than that.
60s, yeah. It had to be in.
It wasn't that long ago.
Well, it had to be like in the latter part of the 60s.
No, it was after that.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah. So you were in that first wave of jet flight attendants?
I won't go that far back.
Okay.
but I was one of the few African American flight attendants at that time. And when I was based in Seattle, I would take flights all over the country, and I met a guy on the flight who became my husband.
Okay.
And I moved to Los Angeles. He lived in LA in Pacific Palisades. And so he was a little bit older than me and had 4 kids, and his wife had died. And then together we had 1. So by the age of 23, I had 5 kids.
Wow.
But it was interesting because they were well educated, and they actually, I learned a lot from them, just learning the value of education.
Right.
And he had a PhD in economics, and yeah, and so I grew in that household. I actually learned a lot.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So is that did that lead you to USC?
Well, first I went to UCLA because he was affiliated with UCLA. And so I went to UCLA for a couple of years and studied communications and anthropology. Well, anthropology, as a part of my studying anthropology, I got interested in the Bedouins, which is the nomadic Arabs that travel around the desert. And I got an exchange student program with Ben Gurion University in the Negev, in Beersheba, Israel. Wow. And I happened to have an opportunity to study with the professor who wrote the only book about the Bedouins. And that was a fascinating time to be in the desert studying.
How did you get to Israel?
I was an exchange student from UCLA. That's right. Studying anthropology, studied the Bedouins. And then when I came back, I switched gears and went to USC because UCLA had a communication school but not a journalism school, and I wanted to be a writer.
And USC
Right.
had the
And
Annenberg
USC
School.
had the best Annenberg,
Yeah.
Annenberg School of Communication.
Wow, fantastic.
Yeah.
And so once you get there and get the journalism experience,
I was ready to publish that magazine I published.
Oh.
So I used my skills to publish Good News magazine.
One of the things that the woman who built this building, Judy Claves, in her last talk here, she said to the students, do not be afraid to be entrepreneurial. This is, and she talked about how the climate was changing, and you're the one they've been waiting for here. Do you sense that, how do you feel about that? Do you see the same thing now? A lot of opportunity?
There's a lot of opportunity out there. I encourage my students to have an entrepreneurial mindset, to have a global mindset. You know, I'm teaching the International Journalism and Communications class. And I reminded them it's so important to open your mind. Just think out of the box.
Yes.
Be brave.
Yes.
Face your fears.
Yes.
Go for it.
Yes.
Live your life.
Yes.
You know, you hold yourself back when I'm afraid to go over there. I'm afraid to, you know, travel abroad. My parents don't want me to go too far. Get over it. Live life. Enjoy every moment. Yeah. And so my students were talking about their fears, and we've decided to do a podcast where they can interview people who have actually studied abroad, and they can look at the data, and they can look at the statistics and compare, you know, are we being more racially discriminated against overseas compared to here? I don't know the answer, but they're going to do the research and let us know.
Yes, yes.
So yes, entrepreneurship, just thinking out of the box and knowing that you can, and that you can do whatever you want to do.
Well, a lot of people though tell, especially black people, oh, you can't start no business like this. You don't have the money. You don't have access to money. You can't get loan. That never
entered my mind. I figured
and it didn't stop you.
And
either.
it never stopped me.
And you were successful.
I'm still hanging in. I'm still learning. You know, I don't feel like I've made it or anything like that. I look at it like this is part of my journey in life.
Right.
I feel very, very, very privileged and very blessed to be able to go through all the experiences I've been through and still standing, right?
Yes.
And still growing and still learning and still meeting exciting people and doing interesting things. As you know, one of the visions I have for the school is to build a global media center. And
explain what that
looks like.
What do you?
Well, I'm thinking, you know, especially now with the pandemic, people can't travel. So I'm thinking, well, let's bring the culture into the school. maybe we do partners with the embassies, the foreign embassies, and have them come in and have a class that's their country, have it decorated with their furniture, have their food, have their panels, have their languages. And our students can benefit from learning about these cultures right here.
Yes.
But then linking that when we do start to travel to study abroad programs, and not only for students, but for faculty.
Yeah.
Because faculty need to keep up with what's going on in the world.
Absolutely.
I mean, the internet has changed everything. Social media has changed everything.
Yeah.
We have to be on top of it.
Yes.
If we want to compete, we have to learn what everybody else is learning.
Yes.
Because we want to be the best. I want our students to be the best.
Fantastic.
So that's what I'm bringing to the school.
Fantastic. Well, that's a big, that's a truck. That's a Mack truck, yes. It's very exciting. And that, I think I wanted to say, with this, your outlook, you're the one this school's been waiting for. Because you have to have that large vision. And you can't, I don't think you can even understand it unless you've experienced it. And you've done so much of that. I mean, it's amazing. Now, you were saying that you've had dealings in like 13 countries. Tell us about some of those.
Okay, it's every country that I've been in is different, and the people are different, and the cultures and the social mores. I know what I had to get used to in Africa and some other Spanish countries, even in Israel, is the time. People aren't on time. They have their own on time according to our rules and regulations,
right.
but they're on time according to their country.
Right.
So I remember going to a meeting in Johannesburg, and I go to the receptionist and say, I have a meeting at 10:30. Okay, have a seat. Mr. Jones will be with you just now. So I sat down for about half an hour. And I go back, is he coming? Says, he'll be with you just now. Now. Okay, now, I sat down again. And then, is he coming? And it says, he'll be with you urgently. Well, what I learned was if they say just now, that's a 25-minute wait. If they say now, that's another 15 minutes. If they say urgent, you're still waiting 5 minutes. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Wow. Okay, so I had to get used to that.
Right.
But I've become very patient as a result. I'm much more patient now than I was when I first went to Africa. Mm. Now, was it in Senegal? No, it was Ghana. People were 2 hours late. And they would wait for each other.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, now this is a stretch from a half an hour in South Africa to 2 hours, okay, in Ghana. But so time I had to get used to. Learning words that you should not say or gestures that you should not do that may offend someone in a country. Senegal, I was able to, I will never forget, Senegal was the first place in Africa that I traveled to from South Africa, outside of South Africa.
Right.
And when I landed, it was amazing to see a sea of black people. I had never seen so many black people.
Yeah.
I mean, and they were all happily, greeting their loved ones. And when I walked through the airport, black people were in charge.
Yeah.
They were the managers. They were all the people you had to go through as authorities. Yeah. And I thought, this feels pretty good being in the majority, And I just enjoyed it so much because it's a different feeling than it is here where you're in the minority.
Absolutely.
Right? It's a totally different feeling.
Yeah.
I loved it.
When you were growing up in Oklahoma, did you have, now I understand that you'd had this thing that wiped out the business sector, but did you have people doing exciting things there that you say, oh, I could do that? Or
no. I didn't, as I said, I didn't have really role models. Most of the time when I would fantasize about these faraway places, I would see pictures in a magazine. Okay. So I saw pictures of Portland one day, and there were trees, lots of trees. I didn't know it rained so much.
Yeah, right.
It drizzles a lot there, exactly.
Yeah. But that again, that's something that you can connect with and see, and
yes.
Yeah. Wow. When you of all these places, what is the one you'd like to maybe go back to the most? Do you think, or don't you?
there's so many beautiful places. Wow. I loved Cape Town. I loved Cape Town.
You mean for its beauty?
Yeah, it's beautiful. But I also,
Were the people nice people?
You know, it depends. You know, when you visit a place, it's one thing, but when you live there, you get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yes.
I did become friends with Winnie Mandela and her two daughters, Zinzi and Zanana. They would have me over for dinner and interact. So that was really, really interesting. Hugh Masekela, you probably know. He was my neighbor.
Yes, I met him.
And his wife, Miriam Makeba.
Yes.
So that was interesting to get to know them as people.
Right.
So, you know, there were people that were nice, and there were other people who felt like, you know, especially at that time, that Americans were coming over to take jobs away from them, and that they were just free, like South Africans were just free. So they had all these opportunities, and so there was some, you know, competition in that sense. But I made friends with everybody, and that's the one thing I share with my students. In all the countries that I've worked in, I've made lots of friends. I was never treated, to my knowledge, I was never racially discriminated against or anything like that. Maybe culture may have, I had to learn the culture of different countries. But there's places in Shanghai that I love. It's so beautiful there. Of course, southern France is gorgeous. So I can pick out all kinds of places. Brazil, oh my goodness, gorgeous places. So I like them all. Yeah, so many places I like.
And you brought a lot of this experience back to Hampton University, and you came here to work with students here. How did that come about?
Well, you know, I actually came back, as I said, to give back to students. I wanted to share my knowledge and experiences with Black students, because I rarely see African Americans at the table. In most of the countries I went to, there were very few African Americans, and especially students. We had started, through my company, we started an HBCU China network, where students from HBCUs, 43 of them signed up with us. So we had 43 HBCUs where students could travel to China and study at a Chinese university. So between—
You actually took the students?
We took the students. We took cohorts of students. We would go over, and throughout the whole country of China, they would study at various universities. The Ministry of Education in China actually covered the cost of their tuition, room and board, and all they had to do was to get there. And they could study Chinese language and culture. So we started that in 2014, and between 2014 and 2019, when it stopped because of COVID, there were 1,000 HBCU students that had studied in China.
Wow.
And even after that, 2020 and 2021, we created virtual study abroad programs where HBCU students could study and learn Mandarin and culture remotely, virtually. So that is still going on. And then we got scholarships for Congressional Black Caucus members for students from their districts to actually study as a part of that program abroad.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow. So when we get out of this pandemic situation, will these programs be restarted?
I hope so. And I hope that we'll create some from Hampton where Hampton students can study anywhere in the world they want to study. And we put together some funding packages to support them. And we make partnerships with universities in different countries. I mean, I'm looking forward to putting some of that together right here at Hampton.
Fantastic. The other, a few nights ago in my class, the students talked about these bomb threats to the universities. Very emotional about it. Mm-hmm. How do you see that? Is that just, what do you make of it, I should say?
It's such a disruption in our education by people who mean us, they don't mean us well. it's really unfortunate what's going on in the United States right now from a racial perspective and just divisive politics. And I think all of that is coming into play with those bomb threats to HBCUs. It's just very unfortunate that we have to deal with something like that. But if you go back in the 60s, you too had to deal with all kinds of things like that. The people thinking violence against us because they don't want us to have the same access and the same opportunities, because we thrive when we have opportunities. Yeah. You open up the door for us and we're in there and we're doing things and we're doing them well and we compete very well. So that's the fear, I think, is that we will do so well that they don't want to see that. And that's unfortunate. And we should just keep our heads up high, move on. If a bomb threat comes, you leave the building, do the proper thing, and come right back and keep on pushing. That's
fantastic.
Right.
Your enthusiasm, your experiences, this whole wonderful package that you bring here, it all points to having a golden era in this school.
I hope so. Well, I didn't add that Dr. Harvey and Hampton, they were a part of the HBCU network. Oh. And that's how I actually learned about Hampton, because first of all, I didn't even know what an HBCU was, I'm embarrassed to say, because we don't have them in California on the West Coast, right? And so when I moved to Washington, D.C., I kept hearing this word, Howard. Yeah. And I finally said, excuse my ignorance, but what's a Howard? And they explained the whole HBCU structure to me, and it was so fascinating. So I went to the campus, and I just walked around, and I said, this feels great. And then I was invited here to Hampton, and I love this campus, the home by the sea, as you call it. And I thought, now this is my spot, because I love water and boats.
The real HU.
This is the real. I said, this is the spot. And then Dr. Harvey has a book called The 10 Principles of Leadership. Yes. And he sent me a copy. And when I read it, I called him up and I said, Dr. Harvey, this book ought to be translated in Mandarin, and we ought to go find a publisher over in China and have it sold over there and put it on Alibaba and have it, access to all that, 1.3 billion people.
Yes.
And he said, that sounds like a good idea. And so we took his book, and my team translated it to Mandarin. And I went over with someone from his office, also went with me to find a publisher. We got the top 3 publishers in Beijing, and they were actually jockeying for position to which one was going to take it. And we chose one, we published it, and we launched it in just a few months later. It didn't take that long. And Dr. Harvey didn't want to travel. He's already been to China before, so he didn't want to travel to China again. But he sat in this studio, and they streamed his remarks to Beijing, and I went over to represent him.
Incredible.
And so they had a big launch.
Fantastic.
So, and then he called, somebody called me from the journalism school and said, would you mind teaching a virtual class? And that was a semester ago, and I taught that class. And then they called and said, well, would you like to do it in person, or could you do it in person? And I said, sure. So when I came this past semester, I just came to teach the International Journalism and Communications course. I did not plan on staying, right? And I taught 2 days, and the 3rd day I was asked if I would become the interim dean.
Well, Dean Wilson, it's so wonderful to talk to you. I mean, in talking to you, what I've come away with, we could have talked for days, because I feel we really only scratched the surface, but listening to you and your ideas, it all points to some bright lights shining here. Okay. Welcome to the Caldwell Café, and I hope you'll come back again and again. No.
Thank you so much.
I should say, you will bring new ideas to this venture, too.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you. You're such a historic figure, and I'm just honored, actually, to be on the Caldwell Café.
Well,
thank you.
Right back at you. It's so wonderful to have you, and I hope this is the start of something bigger.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I hope you got that on tape.